Sean, what are those stories making the news this week? What's the big events in the BVI?
Greetings, viewers. Edwenka, the ministers responsible for the environment in the 9-member Organization of the Eastern Caribbean States Sub-Region, the OECS, will gather in the Virgin Islands this week for the first meeting of the Council of Ministers, the first meeting of the Council of Ministers since the revised Treaty of Bastia was adopted in 2011. An exhibition on climate change was held on Monday, September 29 at the Central Administration Complex here in Rotown. And that pretty much marked the start of activities that will take up much of this week. And on Tuesday, September 30, that is earlier today, some 30 or so of the 40 delegates gathered at the Marias by the Sea Hotel to hold or convene a technical meeting before they take some of their proposals and ideas and suggestions to the Council of Ministers meeting scheduled for Wednesday, tomorrow. Of course, that will be held as well at the very same Marias by the Sea Hotel. But earlier this afternoon, the H. Laverty Stout Community College welcomed the opening ceremony of what is considered the inaugural opening ceremony of the Council of Ministers, and that was expected to hear addresses from Premier Dr. Orlando Smith and His Excellency Governor John Duncan. Now, Wednesday, as I said earlier, we will hear at some point, maybe during the evening, what is the outcome of the meetings between the ministers and their technical support from throughout the OECS sub-region. But today we spoke with Dr. Asha Singh, and she heads the Oceans Governance Unit at the OECS Commission, formerly the Secretariat, now called the OECS Commission. And she told JTV News why the meeting is important, why it's important for all these environment ministers to meet here in the Virgin Islands, specifically as it relates to what are the important issues for everyone in the 9-member OECS countries. Let's have a listen.
Yes, as you know, that the environment is a very broad area, and we have a number of thematic areas. Of relevance is one is ocean governance, and we are bringing before the ministers a number of issues. One dealing with boundary delimitation and ocean acidification, to name a few. We also have an area of energy, and energy we're bringing a number of issues as well, including ESERA, which is the Eastern Caribbean Regulatory Authority. We also have issue of geothermal. As you know, that one of the major challenges in the OECS is our high energy budget. And therefore, we constantly have to seek effort to how do we ensure that we harness those renewable energies that we have, for example, the sun. And geothermal is one that has a potential in the OECS. We can see a number of changes, but as you know, we must take this in context, that we can endorse a number of initiatives, but if we do not have the financial resources to put into these initiatives, it becomes also very problematic. However, having said that, once we have the political endorsement, it gives us a lot of leverage to go after financing from donor partners and other agencies, but also to build partnerships. So what we're hoping that on ground, for example, we have brought to the minister an issue of marine protected areas, and what we want to do is to start developing a network for marine protected areas. We want to get to all the levels of persons who are involved in marine protected areas, that is the managers or the people who are using it. We want to change the discussion on how do we deal with marine protection and see it in a different light, not only as biodiversity protection, but also providing livelihoods to the many people in our member states, in our countries who are using, who depend on those resources that we are trying to manage sustainably.
So there you have it, Edwenka and listeners, Dr. Asha Singh. And the Sustainable Development Unit at the OECS Commission, led by Director Bentley Brown, is responsible for convening the meeting being hosted by the BVI. What are your thoughts on some of what you've heard?
Well, it's interesting, the whole issue of climate change and preservation of the environment. what can we do? What are we supposed to do in the region to preserve our environment when you have the international community creating all the pollutants that is usually headed our way? How do we mitigate those particular set of circumstances with this OECS initiative?
And you ask a very tough question because in response, not trying to answer your question, but in response, China, India, US, Russia, and Japan, these are known as the big and of course developed powerhouses out there. Russia, and the US, China in particular, we know these are some of the countries that are responsible for much of the manufacturing in the world today. China as well, being one of those emerging economies that is dominating the world economic sphere. And what can we do is a very, very tricky question to answer.
Well, Dr. Singh has talked about political leverage, and I'm trying to determine political leverage directed at who. Whether she's talking about that leverage directed at the international community or the more industrialized countries, and how is that, through what mechanisms, what agencies and avenues is that political leverage going to be channeled?
And that's one of the observations I made while I researched prior to the start of this discussion. I noticed that the OECS Commission, through Dr. Singh and that particular department, they have been seeking to coordinate efforts, funding efforts really, or assistance from international donor agencies, both government and non-government. And one gets the sense that there is some level of interest from the international community to preserve the environment, because there is some public relations issues at stake as well, apart from a genuine concern for the environment. But again, which country would decide to halt or to stall their urge to progress economically? Would China say, okay, we are satisfied with where we are at, we don't necessarily want to be the #1 economy in the world, and so we would reduce our CO2 emissions? Would Russia decide to do that? You see, it's a very, very difficult road to walk, I can imagine, for the OECS.
What is our minister saying? What are our plans for preserving our environment? Because our environment is significant in that our tourism product depends to a large degree on our environment.
And that's a good point there.
Yeah. What is our minister saying? What are the BVI's
The Minister
plans?
for Natural Resources here, Honorable Dr. Kedrick Pickering, you may have heard him say on several occasions that there is no tourism without the environment. In fact, what I noticed today as well, as I glanced through some details, there is a widely accepted view that 80% of the Caribbean's tourism product depends or is heavily linked to the environment. And 80% of our customer base, of the people who are coming to these islands, come because of the environment. So environmental sustainability is a must for us, and I would definitely see why Dr. Kedrick Pickering is insisting that we must preserve the environment. However, given the fact that the Caribbean's CO2 emissions are minimal compared to these countries, China, Russia, the US, and so forth, it means that we have a bigger fight on our hands when we go into the United Nations to argue for improved environmental practices.
We have a challenge already with our coral reefs, where our fish are spawned and protected and go out into the ocean. But also our visitors get an opportunity to explore those reefs and look at the beauty of the underwater sea life or the marine life that we have here in the territory. How are we mitigating the challenges that? How are we going to mitigate the challenges that's presented to those reef, our coral reefs? I've heard data that suggests up to 90% of the reefs are dying.
From coral bleaching.
Yeah,
Yes.
and then of course we have the situation where, and I could never remember the name of this chemical, where this paint is being used on boat bottoms.
Yes.
That is changing female conchs into male conchs and having a significant impact on our sea life in that way. I mean, I don't hear anything from our natural resources ministry that is channeled towards banning those kinds of chemical use in the territory. Chemicals that have been banned in other parts of the world. You can't use that chemical in the United States, as a matter of fact. So, I'd like to get some specific information about what are we doing to preserve our environment here in the Virgin Islands.
And I'd like to follow up on what are we doing, because even as citizens in the Caribbean, I still believe, and the record does show, that we are guilty of littering way above what even our own environment can handle. You would see the wanton disposal of waste, in particular plastics and so forth. We have issues related to sewage, improper management of sewage and other liquid waste, the disposal of oils and so forth. Those things are being done almost randomly throughout the Caribbean, and in many cases it is difficult to legislate or even police people. People should really take greater responsibility for the environment. I was checking as well while you spoke that although there are some legislation within the Caribbean to control littering and so forth, not much improvement is realized when we look at the amount of degradation we see in the environment itself. For example, going back to the issue of the corals, a lot of the destruction is really blamed on fishing itself, overfishing in some areas. But to be fair too, there is also the threat from the lionfish, which is not indigenous to the Caribbean, which actually came out, we are told, from a Florida aquarium and is now wreaking havoc on our fish, our marine life throughout the Caribbean.
And substantiating my point that the international community is the community that's creating a lot of the pollution and environmental degradation on the earth, but we are unable to do anything to stop them because, of course, their economic development, as you pointed out, is paramount for their interest. The other thing is energy. I heard Dr. Singh talk about energy diversity and alternative sources of energy. We seem to always be, the Caribbean region and the developing country, particularly small island developing states, always seem to be behind the 8 ball, if to use that term. They always seem to be behind Europe and North America when it comes to, and Asia, when it comes to protecting our interests. It's like, I mean, for many years now, we know that we in the Caribbean have solar energy in abundance, and instead of making that transition to solar energy and other sources of renewable energy, we waited until seemingly they say it's okay for us to now do that. But to me personally, it's annoying that we always waiting on the international, quote unquote, international community to do the things for our region that we know need to be done, as if we have to get permission in order to do these things. And so I'm interested to see what is going to come out of this OECS meeting and how we are going to seize initiatives in our own best interest, and how we are going to be able to get those initiatives through our political directorate to make sure that we indeed are sustainable and our environment is preserved for our economic best interest in growth and development.
And I agree. In fact, if we are to continue along that vein, in terms of the OECS Commission actually reaching, their target goals, look at what has to happen after these discussions and meeting. The respective ministers would now have to come or go back to their various ministries and, of course, cabinets, governments, countries, and convince them that they need to implement the various proposals and adopt those protocols. And when those decisions are made, there's a financial implication. Now, this is where I'm going with this. If there isn't a unified approach in terms of going out to access funding, then even at the individual level, these countries would find it very difficult to implement the various proposals that they would have adopted at this Council of Ministers meeting here in the BVI. And then it would be an issue of how soon, when. Would it take a year or 2 years or 3 or more for them to actually see for there to be some results? And in terms of the access to funding, we've heard Dr. Pickering again speaking to that issue, because they had, I believe, some research work done on the environmental preservation here in the Virgin Islands. And some of the issues with as it relates to climate change, you saw a threatening pretty much of some of the existing tourist sites and, of course, businesses as well throughout the Virgin Islands, with Anegada and other low-lying areas being the most at risk. And you have to ask yourself what is going to happen down the road if we don't stem the tide in terms of the rising sea levels, which, of course, are dependent on decreasing CO2 emissions and improving environmental management and sustainability.
And the other point you make in terms of funding, this changeover and this mitigation of environmental challenges, is we always seem to have to be going with hat in hand.
Yes.
You know,
we got to go out the region because we don't have the resources. Even though we may have resources to generate much more money,
yeah.
We are not pooling our resources in the Caribbean either. That's a point I should make as well.
Yeah.
Even though we have the OECS sub-region, yes, established since 1981, we're doing well as a sub-region. But even within those 9 member states, there is still some tug of war in some cases, and you're not seeing the harmonization that there needs to be for us to realize some of these goals, you know. But I want to draw your attention to something, Edgerenka, because I really didn't pay much attention either, that Pakistan, Qatar, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and Iran are the top 5 countries with the worst air pollution. And when I look at the various reasons, I noticed that in many cases, in the case of Pakistan, for example, where thousands of people die because of lung infection or cancer-related ailments, it's usually because of smoke, mold, and dust. And in Qatar, heavy construction in the area, again, raises the issue of dust. But they're actually doing something quite creative. They are building a forest, so to speak, using creative ways to recreate a forest so that they could stem the tide of the dust that is circulating the area. Afghanistan, because of the wars in those areas, a lot of open areas that once had vegetation that no longer have anything except dust and stone and boulders, and the list goes on basically.
Well, that is certainly creative to plant trees to use up the carbon dioxide.
Yes.
In the air.
So it's a very ingenious reforestation program.
Yeah, and there've been reports of where in Guyana, for example, in South America, in other countries in South America, the preservation of the forests, the Amazon in particular, is being paid for by members of the international community,
yes,
so that we could have some oxygen to breathe in the future. And I think that's an interesting idea. But certainly, Sean, we know that unity is the key to our success, and it's great to see the OECS coming together and forming one head on preserving our environment and to make sure that we maintain sustainable. So that is a positive act as far as I'm concerned, how we get it to work and how we get to drive through those issues that are in our best interest, that it still remains to be
Remains to be seen.
Yes. Thank you very much for that report.
You're welcome.
Spotlight is brought to you by Tortola Concrete Limited and H. Lavity Stout Community College.